This is the Expert and the Idiot podcast. If you like the show and you'd like to support us, there's a link to our Patreon in the description below. Some benefits include getting access to new episodes up to a month in advance. There's also links to USARK and USARK Florida. If you're not already a member, please sign up. Enjoy the show. Welcome to episode 47 of The Expert and the Idiot. Today I'm talking to Glen McClellan of Glen Herpetofauna. And you're the author of the Complete Reticulated Python, which you've been kind enough to send on over here to The Expert and the Idiot to give away. So we'll be talking about the details for the book giveaway at the end of the episode here. We're going to talk about a few things. I politely asked you to look into Timor pythons. That'll be an exciting thing to talk about. Cause, yeah, they're the other Malayo python light. But, so, you know, I know you've been on a lot of podcasts and everything, but you know, what kind of got you into snakes and then why specifically reticulated pythons and we'll go from there, but also you're in Florida now, right? Yes, and what's your game plan there? Do you plan on escaping Florida, or do you like Florida? Do you want to stay here? Do you love reticulated pythons, but do you love them from a distance?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. So,
I asked you 20 questions. I know. So, yeah. Sorry. That's what I do.
I'll thread a story here. To answer the first part of that, I'll probably leave Florida not long after I graduate here for another 2.5 years. So once I'm done, there's not a whole lot of reason to stay. All of my friends and family are back in California, so I'll probably move back there and get established. It is kind of interesting how the absence of being able to keep them in captivity has kind of made my heart grow fonder for them. There's always something desirable for humans just in general when we can't keep something we want or we can't get something, that pursuit of the inobtainable. And so my interest in them has kind of rekindled and taken a newfound appreciation for them. Instead of just looking at what could I possibly keep, look at everything in a broader view. And I've always been interested in snakes. And kind of a big dichotomy between other people and my generation is that instead of going out and finding them too often, I got to live that experience through the television, watching people like Austin Stevens, people like Jeff Corwin, people like Steve Irwin. I got to watch them go on these incredible adventures, all from the comfort of my house when I was 2-3 years old. As my cat jumps onto the couch. I don't know if you saw that little parkour move. And being able to kind of live vicariously through them taught me a very respectful approach to the animals that I perhaps wouldn't otherwise get, because obviously when you're on TV, you're trying to present a fairly idealistic version of what it is to be out in the field and what these animals are. Of course, there's the entertainment and shock value, but at the end of the day, especially those three gentlemen were all about respecting the animals. And that's something I've tried to carry through with my appreciation for them, and something I try to speak frequently about when I'm on these podcasts or through the book.
Right on. So do you plan on getting retics again?
Probably one or two. I'm not someone who wants to have a huge collection. I've never had a huge collection. That's just not interesting to me. I would rather kind of get as much out of as few animals as I can. So how can I maximize this habitat to see the most natural behaviors, or how can I adjust this animal's habitat to make it slightly better for them? It seems to me that the more animals you get, the less you appreciate the individual. I've had my one ball python for, oh gosh, 11, 12 years. And even though it's a pastel Congo, that will forever be my favorite snake because I've been able to grow with him and he has been able to grow with me. And every time I have tried to improve his husbandry, improve his habitat, he has rewarded me with more natural behaviors. And that's something you're not going to see when you have a room full of snake racks. I love to go visit those people because it just makes my mind go crazy of all the possibilities. And obviously, I'd want to keep all of them. But whenever I find myself looking at snake racks online to see how many animals I could fit into a small space, it is a good reminder to put on the brakes, take a step back, and remind myself what I really like about these animals in the first place. And I never want it to seem like a job. I never want to dread having to go into the snake room to change water, to feed, to clean, all of that. And so by keeping a small collection, I'm able to do that. When I do live in a state again where I can keep them, I'd probably get something like a cow reticulated python. I think those are the coolest things in the world. And now they're becoming increasingly smaller. Rick O'Neill and Andrew Acevedo are up to 62.5% super dwarf cow, which is just unthinkable for how not long ago that mutation was first created. And to see it already in such a high percent super dwarf is just incredible and speaks to the work that those two gentlemen and others have done. And then I'd probably get a wild type, something like maybe a Ternate Island, a Slayer Island, maybe a Coyote, something a little bit different, and something to really keep that appreciation of the natural form. How are you a big morph guy, or are you more of a wild type guy?
That's not fair. That's my question for you. I actually have that written down.
Okay. Well,
no,
I get to ask you first.
I prefer wild types, and I prefer really refined lines to give you like the absolute, most impeccable presentation of what, could be found in the wild, right? Something that has been bred to bring out a certain specific look, and just really like show you like the most incredible thing. But yeah, usually I think that when I first got back into the hobby, I was thinking about all the morphs, because I remember keeping initially, I was sort of getting wild types, and then I remember looking in books and being like, oh my God, this is so cool looking. I remember seeing a jungle jag and thinking like, that is just the coolest looking snake. Like, I wish I would have gotten that over the jungle that I had at the time. And then as time went on, and then, I ended up learning about the jag mutation and everything. And I'm like, actually, I'm not interested in that. Like it kind of, that beauty comes at a price. But I do have some morph ball pythons, and I have two. I have a pair. It's nothing. I don't have racks and racks of ball pythons, and a couple morph boa imperators or imperators. I don't know.
And for scientific names, the pronunciation doesn't matter. It's meant to be written.
Oh, okay. All right. It's meant to be said in your head 5 different ways.
It's getting into the weeds, but it's meant to be a kind of a common language, literally a common language amongst people in the field, no matter where they're at. And then who cares about the pronunciation? It's meant to be written. So
okay, but yeah. So that was going to be my question for you is, and you already kind of answered it. When you said a cow retic, I was kind of shocked, and then you said,
I know, yeah.
Well, I was just shocked because I thought you'd have more of an appreciation for localities and wild type, but then you went right into that and you said that. So you kind of want the best of both worlds is the vibe I'm getting.
Yeah. I want to see the absolute most beautiful thing that nature in its purest form can create. And then I want to see when nature goes awry, when we play mad scientist. And are you familiar with the ocelot reticulated pythons?
Yes.
Okay, so a lot of people like those, and I'm honestly not a huge fan because that mutation takes away so much of what makes a reticulated python for me. And then so at that point, I'm turned off because I can no longer see enough of what that original animal was. And what's kind of interesting is that original male people thought was a hybrid, and not a mutation that was found in the wild. They thought it was a cross between a Timor python and a retic, but it turned out to be its own thing. That's how different it looked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about the crosses between the Timors and the retics?
Hybrids. So if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have said absolutely no, under no circumstance. And then now I own 2 hybrids. Like
really?
Yeah, they're green tree pythons.
Oh, yeah.
Designer green tree pythons. And now I look like an idiot. But my big takeaway for hybrids is generally there should be historical precedent. So with green tree pythons, we've been crossing them since 1973, and there shouldn't be deleterious effects in the animals. So we know that like carpondros generally don't produce well or don't produce at all. I believe all of in the short tail complex, they can interbreed with each other, correct?
Yes, but it's super frowned upon, and I don't think that there's many people that do it. And the upside is that from my understanding, when 2 different short tails are crossed, it kind of looks like trash.
Oh,
so there's not much of a desire to do it for that purpose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is awesome.
That's an easy. It's like desert ball pythons. The females don't reproduce. People don't keep them. So,
but everybody likes mules.
Yeah, well, that historical precedent. That's part of it. They have a purpose, and it's been done for so long. To frown upon it now is just not really something that sits right with me, because yes, I have more information. Yes, there are essentially 4 different species of green tree pythons, but that wasn't known back then. So why should I look down upon the people who were doing the best with the best information they had at that time? And now I get the benefit of 50 years of selective breeding. But obviously it comes at a cost of owning hybrids, and we're not seeing too many deleterious effects from them. Obviously, when you inbreed to a great degree, you are. But the major issues with green tree pythons you see is having neonates that are tough to establish, but that's because we're not feeding them skinks like they would be in the wild. And then of course there is probably some decreased vigor with being a hybrid, but we're not seeing sterility like we are in other hybrids.
So I hear people often talking about morphs, and they say that it's broken genes. What causes the initial pattern? What causes the wild type pattern? Is that a set of genes that showed up and then that animal was just blended better into leaf litter and was less likely to be picked off, and then they went on to breed and it just carried on those genes?
Yeah, essentially. Obviously there is going to be a look for everything that it is descended from, but then over time, through tens of thousands of years, you are going to see this kind of refinement and coalescence around a singular look. So perhaps the animals that were able to camouflage better were able to reproduce more and then share those genes. And obviously phenotype is polygenic. So every animal is going to look a little bit different, and then how that presentation of those genes affects the reproductive success. It's yada, yada, yada. It is epigenetic. It's genetic. There's a lot of different things that factor it. But okay, there's a reason why there's a lot of brown pythons. That look works well. And then for arboreals, you see convergent evolution with green tree pythons and emerald tree boas, even though they live on opposite sides of the world. When you're an arboreal constrictor, it works well to be green. And then if you're on the ground, it works well to be brown. And those things just happen over time in the accumulation of genes, yada, yada, yada. Evolutionary 101, someone who is more well-versed in that can explain it better.
Sure.
But that's what you pay a college instructor for.
Yeah. So when you get back into retics, what is that going to look like? Or are you from a caging perspective? What in your opinion is the bare minimum for a cage for a reticulated python?
Yeah, so in the book, I talk about these guidelines that were put forth by the Federation of British Herpetologists or Herpetoculturists. I don't recall. But they have a dimensional framework that they say the cage to be 0.9 times the snake's length. I think it's 0.45 times the snake's width, and then 0.3 times the snake's length in height. So that's a general framework. So if you have a 10-foot snake, theoretically it should be 9 by 4.5 by 3 feet tall. Obviously, that's huge and isn't generally something that is available to hobbyists. So you have to be creative. In reality, something like an 8 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot would be great for a lot of these animals. And then giving them the opportunity to maybe have a cage extension. I think Apex Cages does that, if I'm correct.
Okay.
But the bigger the better. However, there's a huge caveat in that you need to provide ample cover. So I can see in that cage directly behind you that there is the branches and then the leaves. That's perfect because the animal is able to expose itself if it wants and then be hiding if it also wants to. So I also said in the book and kind of regretted that you can put a baby animal in an adult enclosure, and you can do that because I've done that. However, I don't think you necessarily should because it's so difficult to do it right.
Yeah.
But it's, think about it in nature. A baby corn snake is going to survive because it has to. Obviously, it can be predated, but it's going to use its environment in a certain way to make sure it survives. And if we're not providing those areas of cover in the captive setting, then we're going to falter. And that's why people generally don't recommend it. It can be done. It just needs to be done very carefully. So this ideal enclosure, obviously everyone says as large as you can go. That's, should go without saying, but something large, and then something that's very underappreciated with reticulated pythons is having a large water area. They are very aquatic animals. They are known for their swimming abilities. They've been found miles outside offshore, appearing to have swam there, and not have been carried necessarily. So having I think I wrote in the book, have a water bowl that is large enough for the animal to fully soak itself in. That's something I want to see pushed further and further. And if you want to take it to another direction, you could make it more of a paludarium with fish and, even a turtle if you're going crazy. Obviously, there's biosecurity concerns with that as well, but it's something cool nonetheless.
Yeah, that would be a wild enclosure.
It would have to be huge. It would have to be very thoughtfully designed, all of these different things.
Especially if you're talking a mainland, right?
Oh my gosh. To house a mainland reticulated python correctly is so difficult. I have great respect for the people who can do it, but I have no interest in owning a mainland. That's just too much snake for me. And it no longer becomes enjoyable. That's not for me.
Yeah, I've thought about if I were to leave the state, I would want to get one of the large constrictors, and I think I would probably go Burmese python just because they're a little bit more laid back.
Oh, absolutely.
But I would go, room size dimensions, maybe a 10 by 10 enclosure or 12 by 12 enclosure, that I could walk into without having to bend over or hunch down or anything.
Yeah.
With, big branches everywhere and hides and, fake trees or real trees, maybe even, like palms and things like that. And then crazy ass lighting.
Yeah.
As far as lighting, what are your thoughts on lighting? And I know that you just talked about this on the Retic Lounge about UVB and everything and how it's not needed. But is there benefit in your mind to providing it? Is it going to enhance the quality of life and not looking at it from the perspective of a necessity?
Yeah. So the first thing I will do is plug this, Turtle Preservation by Russ Gurley and Anthony Perleone. Russ asked me several months ago to write the heating and lighting chapter. So if this is of interest and you want more detail than what I provide in the complete retic, I would recommend that thoroughly. I'm able to go into more detail and talk about replicating sunrise and sunset and all of those cool things. But to answer your original question, UVB is not necessary. The only thing that's really necessary heat or lighting wise is to have an external heat source that gets up to 85 degrees, perhaps even lower than that, because I know people have kept them alive, not necessarily thriving, but in lower temperatures. So especially now in herpetoculture, we're moving towards, or we're moving away from a strictly necessity-based view where, they need a cage, they need a water bowl, they need a hide, they need heat, and then you're good. And now we're looking at all of the things that we can add in that maybe complicate our lives, but theoretically can make the snake's lives better. And the kind of modern thinking is to replicate the sun. When you're looking at heating and lighting, that just makes sense if you have ever been outside to go field herping. I know you see turtles all the time there in Nerodia out on the lake, and they're basking in the sun, and then they'll go hide once they've thermoregulated properly. And so there's no reason that we shouldn't replicate that in the captive setting if we're truly trying to do what's best for them, because that's what they've evolved alongside of for millions of years if you're going back to their ancestors. And so the easiest way to do that in captivity, I'll just give the cliff notes, because everyone wants the application, they don't want the theoretical, is to have some sort of fluorescent UVB that'll provide your ultraviolet B and your ultraviolet A. I wish ultraviolet A was talked more about, because reptiles and birds are able to see in that spectrum. And I believe in birds, they've done studies where it influences prey selection for them.
So it doesn't necessarily have to do with what they're absorbing. It has to do with their perception of their surroundings.
So for UVA, yes, it is more of a vision aspect, but obviously they're absorbing UVB, and that's generally thought of for vitamin D3 synthesis. There haven't been any studies in reticulated pythons specifically if they're able to absorb vitamin D3. Something like a dog or a cat can't absorb vitamin D through their skin. So it's obviously not necessary. We're not seeing metabolic bone disease in these animals like we are with lizards. So absolutely not a necessity, but probably something good to provide nonetheless. So fluorescent ultraviolet B bulb will provide both UVB and UVA, and then have some sort of visible light. I think the greatest excuse for providing a visible light source is to grow plants. I love to grow natural plants or real plants in a vivarium because it keeps me more on top of a hydration schedule, missing the plants. And then I like to watch it grow over time. This, small plant that I sprouted from a seedling is now taking over the enclosure. I think that's the coolest thing in the world. And obviously it's going to provide cover for the animals. It's going to make it more aesthetically pleasing for the keeper. It's really such an easy thing to do. And they're so cheap nowadays. After the show, Lucas actually asked me for his specifics and to do it as cheap or specific recommendations and do it as cheap as possible. And the visible light I recommended for him was $12.
Oh, wow. So
there's very little excuse on that front to do it. Unfortunately, UVB is more expensive than I know because I just spent $65 for a bulb and fixture, but I was glad to spend $12 on a visible light instead. And then for near infrared, that's going to be your infrared A and your infrared B. You're going to want some
the visible light. I want to go back to that. So how are you providing that? What kind of fixture are you using personally in your application?
Yeah, so actually the one I have set up for the green trees right now is it's for like garages or shops. If you want to go into this bit more specifics, you're looking for something 6,000 to 6,500 Kelvin, which is what sunlight is approximately, even though something like a 5,000 Kelvin looks more like what we think of sunlight. Technically, 6,500 Kelvin is more sun-like in actual color.
What direction do you go in? Like how does the color change when you go in? If you're going lower, what color does it change to?
Yeah, so we consider that warmer. So that would be more yellow, the lower it is. And then the higher is going to be more white. So that sterile lighting that people hate is going to be those 6,500 Kelvin bulbs.
Okay.
And then there's the lumen per wattage ratio, and you want obviously something as high as possible.
Okay,
then that's
and
an
are
easy
you
way.
using a tube or LEDs?
LEDs. Most of them actually come in a linear format. So the Arcadia Jungle Dawn, Jungle Dawn is linear. But you can also have spotlights that are just normal screw-in bulbs that people use to grow plants. So if someone wanted to do that, you could search up full spectrum LED grow light and just look through the options there. Or you can obviously go into the more specific 6500 Kelvin, full spectrum, yada, yada, yada. In the book, I recommend the Sanzi 36 watt grow light as a spotlight because it's a really strong source of visible light that is hard to achieve otherwise. But you can use multiple bulbs because it is very hard to replicate the strength of the sun. Even with that lighting setup, you're only getting the equivalent of a cloudy, overcast day. Nothing like what's coming in on my face right now through the window.
So you're looking for something you're basically just trying to get all the different. You want to get the heat that you're getting from the sun. You want to get the UV that you're getting from the sun.
Yep.
And you want to get then the color, right? The actual.
Exactly.
Okay. That's the one thing I haven't done yet is the actual visible light portion. You know, I've got my UVB tube, and then I've got my basking light, which I switched over to from the heat projectors. And you know, so I'm sort of going in that direction there. So basically, if you can grow plants in your setup, then you're good.
Absolutely. I should have said that. That is perfect. Yeah. If you can grow plants, it's good.
And are you growing plants in with your snakes?
Yeah. I took a photo the other day. It'll show just to demonstrate, how it's kind of hard to see, but
okay. Yeah. That's
Potho's
nice.
just taking over.
So is that primarily what you put in your enclosures is pothos?
Right now, yes, because I had a horrible problem with, I forget what kind of flies they're called. Fungus gnats.
Yeah.
If you grow houseplants, you're familiar with them. They're such a pain. I had the bottom enclosure entirely decked out with the planting soil, and it was just too damp. And what happened was the fungus gnats absolutely loved it, and it was just horrible. So I took all of that out, put in cocoa husk, and put the pothos in a bowl, and that's still growing great. And that's one of the nice things about pothos is you can propagate it solely in water.
Yeah. I kind of went through a similar journey. I started out with like this soil mixture that I had made from like organic topsoil and mulch and leaf litter and sand and all this stuff kind of mixed together. And then I was having a real problem with just all sorts of bugs taking off in there and taking hold and molds and things like that. And it was just making me anxious. Like cause you know, and I gave it months to kind of cycle through, and I just kept having blooms of stuff. And I guess ideally what I should have done was set it up and then let it cycle like an aquarium. But I mean, you're probably looking at maybe a year of all these blooms and collapses of different, you know, things taking hold as it finds its equilibrium. And now I've just ended up with the coconut husk, and it's so much easier to control humidity. You know, you can go in there and mist and you're fine. You know, I mist maybe 2 or 3 times a week and it stays perfect.
That's a very common story, unfortunately. And not to derail the conversation, but that's one of my issues when people talk or they hold bioactive up in this, you know, the highest regard. And obviously what I talk a lot about mimics bioactive, and I think it's still a fantastic way to do it, but it is very hard if you're going to be running into issues with fungus gnats and bacteria blooms. I mean, you struggled with it. I've struggled with it. And so to tell, especially a new keeper, that to be more ethical, that they need to pursue a bioactive setup, I think is short-sighted, because it's very frustrating And if you're having more success with cocoa chips or cocoa husk, in my case, why not do that? The animal's probably better for it, because think of all of the horrible things they're breathing in if there's mold and fungus growing in the enclosure.
Yeah, and that's exactly, I had this like soot mold that was growing on the leaf litter, and one of my Timors they like to go under leaf litter and nose around, so she was getting this soot on her, and I was like, I'm just done, I'm done. I don't want her breathing that in. I don't want, I was just done with it. Now, I think that the problem too is that these enclosures directly behind me, they don't have a lot of ventilation, and I had to put on computer fans to try to force air through and things like that.
Yeah, I did the same.
These ones here, they're loaded with ventilation. I think it's every 6 inches. You can kind of see this little square, these sort of slots. Yeah, right where her head is as she's pushing, trying to get out. He does those every 6 inches the entire way around the enclosure. So that's a 6 by 2 by 2. So it's got a ton of ventilation. And I now feel like I'd rather have too much ventilation than not enough, because I can go in there, and if I overmissed, if I went a little too heavy on the water, it's not the end of the world, because by the next day it's going to be dried out again, Absolutely. So I like that. Whereas with these ones that are kind of sealed up, if I go too heavy, then it's like, all right, crap, I got to run my computer fans now and really, really put that on. So yeah, I mean, for certain people, I think that naturalistic could be perfect. If your house is like, if you're out in like the Arizona desert,
it worked great for me in California.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I think that if you're in a low humidity area, you don't understand that people that are in a high humidity area, you're just creating this armpit of an enclosure, that's just stagnant and not getting the air that it needs.
Absolutely.
So you do provide UVB for your snakes?
Yes. One is still in the rack system because it was a neonate green tree python, but
sure,
that's what I was just buying everything for, the light-wise. And then for the last part of it, infrared. So your basking bulbs, perfect for that. They're cheap. They supply heat. It's so easy. Return to form.
Yeah. So your green tree, is he going into that enclosure that you just showed me with all the plants and everything?
Oh no, that's a separate one. I haven't set up the other one, so I've got 2 right now.
Okay, so are you doing like a sort of bioactive or a naturalistic enclosure for the green tree with live plants and everything?
Yeah, I've got another pothos over in my kitchen that's it's just gangbusters, so that'll go. I'm setting up a 2 by 2 by 2 now that it's old enough. Now that I have enough experience with the species.
Nice. And is he going to stay in the 2 by 2 by 2, or is that sort of just another step and he'll progress to something larger eventually?
It's another step. I'm going to try to go for 4 by 2 by 4 for them.
Wow. For just an individual animal?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Looking at their natural history, it makes a lot of sense, because during the day they're up in the trees, and then at night the adults are down at the ground, and during the afternoon the individuals are down at the ground. But they use that vertical space immensely, and so do reticulated pythons. The juveniles are up in the trees a lot, and then the older ones are more fossorial, but they still climb a little bit. So I really am hoping someone takes the time and figures out a really great way to house juvenile reticulated pythons in a more arboreal setup, because that's what we're seeing in nature. So if there's a way to keep them in a 2 foot tall or even a 4 foot tall vivarium, maybe it's only a foot wide or something. But I really hope someone tackles that.
Yeah, the Timor pythons are surprisingly arboreal. I mean, they're always perching up, which I didn't really expect that. He's not up there right now. This one is this is my 2022 male Timor. His name is Philip Timor Hoffman.
Funny.
And he's not up there right now, but normally he's kind of perched up, and once they settle in and get established, they have like the feed response of a retic. Like every video I've seen of just like them coming out of the enclosure with their mouth open, it's it's bananas, the drive that they have.
Yeah.
So how are you setting up your 2x2x2 for the green tree? Because I want to get some green tree pythons one day. I won't be getting any of the mutts like you have, but
good. Yeah, kind of. I don't want to say regretting it, but at least one of them I wouldn't have purchased, knowing what I know now.
Yeah. Why? So okay. So what do you know now? What has changed your mind on that?
I've become more pretentious.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. We all do.
This is getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's pretty well known that it can be difficult to establish green tree pythons. And there's a breeder, or used to be a breeder, by the name Rob Worrell. One of his big things was breeding for vigor. And it turned out that when he was doing that, color ended up coming out of that. So I have this beautiful melanistic animal that descends from his lineages. But he specifically bred for that, where a lot of other green tree python breeders haven't. There are people nowadays, John Lucky is carrying on Rob Worrell's legacy. And people like Garrick from the House of Blue are really breeding for vigor as well. But for some of the more established lines, there's just a great deal of inbreeding. So now I would be staying away from what Rob Worrell calls the lineaged animals, focus more on getting things from Rob Worrell stock, getting things from Garrick, or people who is more specifically bred for vigor.
So bred for vigor, but still designer and not locality?
Yeah, because you can run into the same thing if you're breeding pure localities together. If the family tree is a straight line, but it's still a pure locality, it doesn't give you anything beyond bragging rights compared to a designer.
Okay. But then now if you're doing like Biocs or Arus that are like F2, you don't have to worry about that, right?
As far as I know, you don't have to. That would be a better question for someone who's done those breedings. But then for the Kofiau locality type, people have struggled for very long times to get those established. And those are pure localities, very outcrossed, or, they're not breeding brother and sister and father to daughter, stuff like that. But they're still difficult to get started.
Walk me through breeding for vigor. What is that?
Yeah. So I'm not a breeder, but I've kind of developed these 3 pillars that I want to focus my collection around. And if I do breed, that's great. And that's breeding for vigor, breeding for health, and then breeding for extreme phenotype. And the idea with breeding for vigor is if you have 2 animals that were strong feeders from the get-go, they are more likely to produce strong feeders from there. And if you were to breed 2 animals that don't have a very strong feeding response as neonates, they're more likely to produce neonates that don't have that strong feeding response. Granted, that's not a universal statement, but in general, that is something you can selectively breed for. And so to have animals in your breeding population that were strong feeders as neonates is something that's very desirable to me, because I don't want people to have bad experiences to where you send out an animal and it no longer is going to eat. And maybe this is their first green tree python. This is something that's talked, unfortunately, fairly frequently amongst the breeders. So even though I'm not personally in that position yet, I don't ever want to be.
So what are you doing with an animal that doesn't feed well? Do you assist feed it? Do you keep it alive no matter what and then sell it as a pet only? Or do you just let it die from starvation and just select the ones that eat well and be done with it?
That's a good question. And I know people have different responses. I would never let anything die of starvation. I think that's too extreme. But the scheme I've developed in my mind is 3 strikes, you're out. But those 3 strikes would have to be very specific. So once again, going back to green tree pythons, it would probably have to be live lizard feeders done during the afternoon. I want to set up the animal for success. Obviously, if it would eat a frozen thawed pinky mouse off the bat, that is the best case scenario. However, I don't want to condemn this animal to death just because it is not strictly adhering to what I think it should be feeding.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? When you hear people that are like, "Yeah, it didn't eat rodents, therefore it must die,"
Yeah,
and then it's like, well, but they don't. That's not what they would eat in the wild.
exactly. So if it was, not eating its natural prey source, that's when I would have more of an inclination that it's not for this world, or maybe you sell it as a pet if you do get it established. There's lots of options.
So you would go from try the rodent pinky first, and if they go for it, great. Now that's there's a super vigorous animal that just wants to eat anything, right? But if it doesn't take it, then what are you doing from there? Are you going to try like chick down, or are you just gonna are you going to try scenting a pinky with a gecko, or are you just going to right into I have geckos and I'm going to offer that? And then where are you sourcing that gecko from too?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Are you grabbing a Mediterranean gecko off your front porch at night, or are you breeding what do they call those little ones that
morning geckos probably?
Yeah, they reproduce parthenogenically.
Yeah, morning geckos.
Yeah, so what direction would you go in? Would you, before you would start breeding, would you keep morning geckos? Are you scenting with morning geckos? Or are you offering a morning gecko?
This won't make me any fans in the crested gecko community, but I would do crested geckos, and I've thought about this because I can
They're
keep
so cute though. You son
that's
of a
the
bitch.
point. That I can still. They would be the breeders would be my pets, so I would get the super Dalmatians with a pale base, but the progeny would be used for feeders. And then, so let's say you get a clutch that's solely established on rodents, and you have all of these crested gecko babies, then you sell them because they're desirable animals.
Yeah. Yeah. That, yeah, you're a terrible person. No,
I
get it.
It's hard.
Dude,
with
I
these
breed
theoretical
rabbits.
Conversations.
Yeah. I breed rabbits, and everybody's like, how do you name them? And you're going to eat them. And I'm like, I name the breeders. The offspring does not get named. When I'm like, our male is the sweetest rabbit in the world. We're never going to eat him. His name is Attila the Bun. He's not getting eaten.
Yeah. And it's like the same thing with cows. You'll get, or farmers will get animals that they, that steer they love. And then we're humans. Even if we try to be cold, it's very hard to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I have a friend that raises cattle, and it's the day when the calves go to slaughter or go to market rather is very, very sad.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of effort that goes into raising an animal like that.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you're doing it right. And it's incredible to go out to a farm. And we went out to a farm once, and the workers were talking about Temple Grandin. Do you know who that is?
No.
Oh, she's a woman with autism who does a lot with animal behavior. And she designed these kind of paths for the slaughterhouses, so the animals are still comfortable all the way up until the time they're slaughtered, and does all these things with industry, and has written several books. Just this absolute inspiration. And this is a beef farm that we're at, and the people who are scooping the poop are talking about this. So
wow,
it was really inspiring.
Yeah, it's creepy, right? When you think about that, like wanting to give the animal the best life possible, right up to the point that you kill it so you can eat it.
It sounds barbarian, but it's very fair.
I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with my rabbits, right? I want to give them the absolute best life that they can possibly have, and be as kind to them as possible and as gentle as possible. Like, just because you're going to eat something and the fate of that animal when it's born doesn't mean that you should just throw ethics out the window.
Absolutely. The animal should be given respect from the day it's born until the day it no longer exists, even if it's determined to be an animal that is used for food. Yeah,
and factory farming, you watch some of the videos on YouTube of chicken slaughterhouses and beef processing and things like that, and it's pretty disturbing stuff, and it's all within, I guess, the ethical code, that's been set in place legally. But so in my mind, I'm like, I could feed my family and do it more ethically and reduce emissions because it's on our property. There's there's no trucks involved. There's no overhead of a store and refrigeration and all that. There would be only on site.
And there's no human labor malpractices.
Exactly. Yeah. And dispatching the animal as humanely as possible.
Yeah.
So it's, there's a lot of, to upside to raising your own animals, whether it's for feeders for your snakes or whether it's for you, then the ethics is in your hands and you can be very ethical about it. And, I don't know. It's going to be hard to do though, no matter what.
Yeah. That's the sad reality of it. It is, you're still a human. You can give these animals the best life, but at the end of the day, when you actually have to do it, it's very difficult. And I'm glad I haven't been in that position yet, but I realize that in my future career, yes. Give me 2.5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you going to college for right now?
Yeah. So I am a doctoral candidate for veterinary medicine. So
nice.
In 2.5 years, I'll be a vet.
What do you think about treating mites with NexGard?
That is an interesting thing. I haven't watched that Paul during an episode, but he's someone who I really look up to. He does things in such a what I would consider a common sense approach,
and thoughtful.
Yeah, very thoughtful. He's a very smart gentleman. So specifically for treating mites with NexGard, I've seen it discussed on some of the veterinary forums. But, at the end of the day, it's going to be something you have to discuss with your veterinarian. Unfortunately, I can't go into more detail. I can't prescribe it. I can't give medical advice. 2.5 years, yes, I can, but not yet.
Sure. Well, I just want your personal opinions. And there is a
personal opinion.
In the
honestly,
comments.
I don't know. I've never had to use it. I've never seen it used in practice. I've only read about its efficacy. But there's also the natural options of something like predatory mites that you can use for mite abatement. So there's lots of options.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is having an option when you keep naturalistically, right? Because a lot of people, like, I don't want to nuke my enclosure because my substrate is filled with springtails. I can't remember the specific kind I have. I think they're called like ant springtails or something. But when I lift up the water bowl, they're like, it's like messing with an ant mound. Like they're everywhere. Yeah. I mean, they're everywhere under there. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to I want to keep them. I want to keep that population in there alive and healthy. I like removing substrate around stools, taking out everything and then scrubbing down that section of PVC and then fill it back in, I don't want to destroy everything that I've worked to build. So yeah, it's like, it's terrifying when you think, man, what if one of my snakes got mites or all of my snakes got mites and I had to get rid of like $500 worth of substrate, in a day? That's crazy.
Yeah. Have you ever propagated springtails before?
No. I mean, I have like one of those little clay things, but that's not the kind that, I mean, I guess technically the answer would be yes, I'm propagating them in my enclosures.
Well, have you propagated them outside of the enclosure? It's so easy to do. You should set up something bigger to keep it, and then you could sell it to one of the pet stores. I did that.
Walk me through it.
Oh, it's so easy. Horticulture charcoal, put it in some water and then some sort of airtight container. It's so easy.
Why does it have to be airtight? Don't they need oxygen?
You don't want them escaping. And then I would just go in every couple of days and open it.
Okay. I often wonder about like all these bioactive and naturalistic enclosures and everything. If you're scooping the poop out and all the bugs are in there and you put it in a bag and you put it in the trash can and it goes to the landfill, are there like isopods and springtails then propagating out at the landfill?
That is a great question, and one that you're probably correct. Technically, I believe to transport isopods, you need some sort of USDA certificate.
So
There's
like
some
when you
sort of
pick one
thing.
up from like a reptile convention and then you're driving home, you're supposed to be certified.
No, technically, or I think if you're selling them, I know Daytona's website has that form on it.
Really?
Yeah. So you're
Jeez
supposed to.
Louise.
I don't
Huh.
know the specifics, but someone who's actually selling isopods should be aware of that.
Is there a way that you could stay in Florida and keep a retic?
Yes. So someone down the road from me, Dr. Stephen Tillis of the Archer Reptile Center, actually does that because he has a facility that he opens up to people. If it was used for research, technically I could keep it. It's very hard though. You're opening yourself up to FWC inspections. They're not going to be handing them out willy-nilly. So it's possible. It's not a reality.
He lives up your way?
Yeah, 10 minutes down the road.
Nice.
Yeah, Eugene Bissett lives 10 minutes down the road. Chuck Vogel lives somewhere around here. It's weird.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, his short tails are incredible.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that if you've ever looked into getting one.
I have quite a few saved on Morph Market. Yeah, they're incredible. Yeah, he's someone I definitely want to get on to talk to.
He is the absolute expert for biosecurity in reptiles.
Yeah. Yeah, he bred Halmahera scrubs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's got a really cool enclosure for him. It's like a grow tent. Is
it really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. That probably makes them more chill too because they don't feel exposed.
They were scrub pythons. I think they're wild caught. They were scrub pythons.
Yeah. Yeah, that's another one that I want to get eventually. I'd really like it if people could start producing them.
Stephen Cush, he's really pushing that. I love to see people create a market like that, especially someone like Stephen.
Yep.
I don't foresee myself owning one.
Yeah. I mean, I would like one when I get the room. I would like to have one, but yeah, you'd need a nice setup for them for sure.
Yeah, a hands-off setup.
Yeah, and that's kind of how the Timors are too. They're sort of a hands-off snake. I mean, there's times when they'll tolerate it, but most of the time it's just like, don't touch me.
Have you looked into any of the behavioral modification from someone like Lori Turini?
No, not yet.
Okay. Yeah. Well, if she has a Patreon, you could sign up for that and get one-on-one lessons.
Yeah, for sure. You want to talk a little bit about Timor pythons?
If you want to, yeah.
Well, of course I want to.
I have a few notes just so I'm not speaking incorrectly. And I should say that for anyone who's interested in the captive history side and the husbandry side, there's a great episode from Morelia Python Radio a couple years ago that Eric and Owen did. And there is a 1996 paper from the Barkers that was, I think, for the International Herp Symposium. If anyone has that or has access to the PDFs, please send that to me. I would love to read that. I can't find it online. So if anyone has that, just putting that out there.
Yeah, the NPR episode, I've listened to that. I can't even tell you how many times. It's such a good episode.
Fantastic episode. They really did their work on that. But and then the other source, Pythons of the World Volume 3, another really great source for Timors. So obviously the big thing is that Timor pythons aren't obviously found on Timor. So the name is a bit of a misnomer. I believe the holotype was labeled as coming from the island of Timor, but that was where it was exported from. Very similar to other things that we see in herpetoculture, but they were first described in 1876 by Wilhelm Peters, and the first Latin nomenclature given to them was Liasis amethystinus variety timorensis.
A lot going on there.
Yeah. And obviously they look a lot more like Liasis than they do reticulated pythons, but now that we know they are more closely related to reticulated pythons than Liasis. I believe they diverged, 9 million years ago, that paper I sent you? There was a great paper done in 2020 that looked at the phylogeny and evolutionary history of pythons. And it said that the most recent common ancestor for the two was 9 million years ago.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I may have that date wrong, but it's a paper,
it's funny.
so we can find it.
it's funny you said that. I feel like they look like they belong Malayo-python. I don't think they look like they belong with Liasis.
Really?
But in my mind, and I've heard that Antaresia, wasn't it some of the Antaresia they thought originally belonged in Liasis, or they originally put there.
That rings a bell.
I could be totally wrong. I think that's a thing. But when I hear that, to me, it makes sense. You know, like if you look at the head structure and everything, like if you were to tell me that they, and I wonder like if they have a common ancestor, like how far back.
Yeah. I don't know how far back that common ancestor would be. I'm sure it says on that paper. I should just pull it up, but the cool thing with lesser sundus pythons is that there's probably 2 species, and this was something that was discussed in Pythons of the World Volume 3, but there's this patternless morph that is found on Rinca, and then from what other people have found on Komodo, and the Barkers and Mark Iulia, I think it is a sister species. So if someone was to go and do that genetic work, you could probably name another species if you wanted.
Yeah, that's super cool. I actually bought that book just for the part on the Timor pythons.
Yeah, it's a very good book, well worth the money. And then on the captive history side, they were first bred by the Dallas Zoo in September of 1975. There's actually a very short blurb in a New York Times article about going to the Dallas Zoo, and you can see the very rare Timor python. But it kind of dead ends there. As far as I can tell, the first private keeper to do it was Don Hamper, and that was probably 1976. And I'm unclear if the Barkers were able to breed them in 1976 or in 1995, because on their biography on World of Ball Pythons, it says they were the first people to breed them in 1976. But in the NPR episode, it said it was 1995, and that more closely lines up to when that paper was released, because that was 1996. So I'm unclear of when the Barkers were able to do it, but it seems like Don Hamper was the first private collector to do so. And
so what islands can you find Timor pythons on?
Yeah, so the big one is going to be Flores, and there are reticulated pythons as well on Flores. Unclear.
Do they ever hybridize?
Yes. So I have
no way they do.
They are said to. I can't find a photo of them in the wild to have hybridized, but they are said to have hybridized in their natural range. It makes sense. They're there. They're closely related. That's
how my wife and I had kids. We were there.
Oh my gosh.
It made sense.
It worked out. Timing was great.
That's so crazy. So on Flores, there's Timors and retics, and
yes.
And they're hooking up.
Theoretically.
Allegedly.
We know in captivity they're able to, and it kind of makes sense that there would be some sort of overlap there. Flores is fairly frequently traveled to because of the Homo floriensis, the Hobbit man that was found there. And I talk a little bit about that in the retic book. And they found snake skeletons during that dig, but they didn't say what species it was from. So I was very intrigued if it was going to be like a retic or a Timor or some colubrid, like a wolf snake that was found there, but they didn't say. And I emailed the author and they never got back to me, so I was very disappointed. But they're there. I have heard reports that they are hybridizing in their natural habitat, and we know they're able to hybridize in the captive setting.
Wow. So I wish I knew where mine came from, because I know that mine came from Ryan Young, and his were, whatever farm raised or whatever.
Bred,
yeah. So what is that? They probably grabbed a gravid female. Do you happen to know where most of the Timors are yoinked out of?
Probably Flores, based on the phenotype that we see. And I don't believe it is legal to collect from Komodo. So no one's likely going to Rinca and getting the patternless. We don't really see too many patternless in at least the U.S. herpetoculture setting. So it's probably Flores, considering that's where it's most populated. And that aligns with the phenotype that we see in the wild. So if I had to guess, Flores, it just makes sense.
And that's where we got some really old human ancestors there.
Very old and very important for our understanding of human evolution.
How old is that Hobbit, man?
Oh, gosh. I know it's in the book somewhere. I wrote that so long ago. That was one of the very first things. 60,000 to 100,000 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man. That is so bananas.
And that's why I really talk a lot about taking a natural history based approach to these animals, because I would have never known that otherwise. But now that I know that there was a human ancestor that arose there just because of the snakes, or I only know that because of the snakes, that really drives me to appreciate them more.
Yeah, it is. That's definitely one of my favorite things about the hobby.
I just really love that movie.
The historical significance of the Hobbit. But yeah, the hobby itself, kind of researching the animals and learning about their native range and everything is something that I really enjoy. Mm-hmm. It's very, it keeps you interested, because you can just get into so many things there, especially with iNaturalist.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. How much do you use that?
You could pull up my profile. I don't submit too many images, but I use it all the time just to look at different things. If I submitted an alligator photo, woodpecker, great blue heron, red-tailed hawk, things I find in my backyard. Not an alligator, sorry. But
yeah. I need to, I should probably put some of the Nerodia that I've been finding on there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a good photo of any of the Nerodia I've found, but if you get good photos, submit it.
Yeah. There's so many. I work at a water reclamation facility, and so even during the cold months, there's warm water going into our ponds. That
do you get manatees there?
No, it's totally closed off, and it's got like a liner and everything, but it's like a clay liner. But the reptiles that hang out at the outfall for the warmth of the water is it's wild. I mean, on a cold day, you can go out there and see all the Nerodia and turtles and birds and everybody just compacted to this one area. Yeah.
Great for herping.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's awesome. So Flores is probably where most of them are getting taken out of, but they're also in Komodo.
Yeah, that's been I don't believe it's actually listed in Pythons of the World Volume 3. I looked this morning to see if they were there, but they weren't highlighted on that map. But I have
We know they're there.
Yeah, we know they're there. The person who took the photo of the back cover of the book found them in the Komodo National Park. So we know they're there.
That's where William Philippek saw his.
Oh, did he? Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
And handled it.
Wow, that's crazy.
And he said it was super chill compared to his own.
Yeah. For some reason, that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but here's the range map. Just for anyone who's watching, so there is a common language. But it's mostly Flores. So I would venture to guess that whoever originally captured, or who captures the wild caught animals, got them from there. So I wouldn't go call your animals Flores locality and then sell them for 5 times the price. But, if I had to venture a guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think I'll ever get mine to reproduce, but
why not?
It seems like it's rather difficult to do. And, who knows? Maybe, I would like to get them larger enclosures, once I set up my building, down the road. It would be cool to maybe do like a 6x2x3, something with a little bit more height. They are extremely active, which, the Barkers noted that. And I know that as soon as the lights are out, they're all over the place. Mm-hmm. They're all over the place.
Do you see them? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Do you see them using the basking spot that you have set up?
No.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if it's just because it's too out in the open, but they seem to thermal regulate by going up and down the enclosure rather than going over to the hotspot.
Interesting.
So yeah, like at the peak temp in my room, let's say, the majority of the year based off of the information that I've logged, they're under their hide will be anywhere from 78 to 81 degrees peak temp during the day, for like 2 hours. Right. And then if they just ate a big meal, they'll leave that hide and go up and perch up. And that perch up in the branches is at like 84, 85 degrees, rather than go and bask in the 88 degree hotspot.
Interesting. Yeah. You should try to, if you can get them a bigger enclosure, see how that behavior modulates.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.
Yeah. And yeah, they're so established now in these 4x2x2s that they're in that I'm afraid to move them. It'll definitely be down the road because there were some issues with feeding when they went to their larger enclosures.
Yeah. That's always, an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. But they did come around. One of them I just put back into his smaller enclosure, into his tub, and, I gave him a few more months and let him put on some more size. And then, he went back. The female is growing alarmingly fast. Like, I feel like she's already the size of the 2022 male.
Wow.
So yeah. And she's a 23. So she's a year younger, but she's just putting on a lot of mass. But I've seen,
Are you going to get any more?
No, I'm good with I have 2 males and a female. I think I'm good with that.
Okay.
They're, because they are kind of a handful. If it's difficult to get them out of their enclosures, because usually when they're perched up, they're wrapped around a branch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and so they want to either run from you or run at you if they think you have food. So it's plenty having what I have.
Yeah. Well, I know Rodney sent me a photo of his breeding the other day. So
really,
if you want unrelated ones, there might be some on the ground not too long from now.
Yeah, I have played with the idea of getting another female and having 2.2.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thought is definitely in my mind. It's more of a space concern.
Yeah, of course.
As we all deal with in this hobby.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
That's the great thing about Antaresia.
Mm-hmm.
You can put them in I just got a stack of 3x2 by 1.5 foot enclosures, and those are going to be perfect. So that's one of my favorite things about them. They're so small.
So why do you think people like the Western Stimsons more than the Easterns? Because I think Easterns look better.
I don't know. I like the wheat belts.
Yeah, I think that's the most commonly. I don't know if there's other Westerns in the hobby.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, some of those wheat belts are just bananas looking. Mm-hmm. I mean, just really insane. Me personally, I like maculosa. I like the spotted pythons. Okay. Just because they, I think they come from a more tropical environment. So I think that they're probably better suited for the way I keep my rooms and everything with a higher humidity. I'm sure that the Westerns and everything would probably be fine. Mm-hmm. And I'll probably end up with some at some point, but yeah, I like the spotteds. I think it's cool too that they're in New Guinea.
Oh yeah. Papuensis.
Yeah.
Which really shouldn't necessarily be. Was it Dr. Julianer on your podcast who was talking about that?
Yeah. He said that it shouldn't really have a different name.
Yeah. He was getting a little fired up there. That was cool to see.
Yeah. And I'm surprised that we don't see a ton more of those in the hobby. You'd think that people would be exporting the snot out of them or at least breeding them and selling them as, Papuan locality.
Dan Maleri.
Yeah. I need to reach out to him and talk to him about those.
Do it. He's great at responding. He helped quite a
Yeah.
bit with the importation process chapter. He's a very good guy.
Nice. So, what retic did you have before, or retics rather, did you have before moving to Florida?
Yeah, so I had a wild-caught Calicoa male. Not
Really?
recommend for anyone's first retic. And then I also had a Coyote neonate from Lucas, but that didn't last long. It was go back. So don't recommend wild-caught, but I've always I don't follow my own advice.
Yeah.
I like to do things complicated. A lot of this isn't necessarily an experiential based book like so much of other herpetoculture literature. This is standing on the shoulders of giants, of the people like Bob Clark who did this for 30 and 40 years, went through all the trials and tribulations. But the issue is that hasn't really progressed. There's not a lot of people, at least in reticulated pythons, beating that drum of moving them into larger caging, naturalistic vivarium, full spectrum lighting, all of those things. And we know now that these animals thrive in that environment. It's probably better for them. I don't have, empirical evidence for that, unfortunately. But it just kind of seems like something we should be doing, and no one was beating that drum. I was willing to do all of the work. I was willing to talk with all of these people. And so that's kind of how the book came to be in that regard, instead of, this being my own kind of biography. This is the biography of reticulated pythons. So I like to say that I can be unwritten from their history, unlike someone like Bob Clark, who is so essential to their history.
What do you think about the production of reticulated pythons in the hobby? Do you think that it's responsible?
So
just to be reproducing them at large numbers, especially with mainland retics, and then just selling them willy-nilly at shows to any person?
Yeah, it is a practice I have a lot of problems with, and something I've never really had the drive to do, because I view it as being so difficult to do correctly. So when people do it correctly, I always try to give them as many props as I can. So that's why you'll hear me mention the same names a million times on these podcasts, because instead of having to spend time talking about people like Samson Pruitt, if I can talk about people like Lucas Bagnera, Nathan Katz, Eric Lee, on the mainland side, Jake Claude, Shane Costello, Travis Warren, all of these people who I think are doing a really good job. I want to make sure that they're known and that their time and dedication is given the appropriate place, because it's not easy, and to do it correctly is very hard. And so it goes back to producing desirable animals. And with reticulated pythons, it's so easy to produce undesirable ones. People want animals that are going to be small. You have a larger market with smaller animals. But in that effort to produce smaller and smaller animals, unfortunately, you get essentially what is byproduct. There's not a whole big market for 25% poshet albino anery superdwarfs, because it's a lot easier to get a 62.5% pure or snow instead. But those animals, that 12.5%, 25% dwarf, poshet, albino, and anathoristic, had to be produced to get to where we are now. So that's a big issue with them. And then obviously the ramifications of selling to someone who is unequipped to house them are so grave compared to selling like a ball python to someone who's unequipped. And it's hard not to get kind of almost emotional about it, because these are still animals that we're talking about at the end of the day. And thinking of the horrendous conditions that they're so commonly kept in, because they're so difficult to keep correctly. And so I think the people who are breeding need to do it with a very strong focus, and that's part of why I have those pillars in my mind, the breeding for health, breeding for vigor, and breeding for extreme phenotype, because that can be your northern star, instead of chasing whatever morph is hot at the moment. If you are known as being the super dwarf snow guy, or if you're known as being the pure locality guy, you will always have that very clear path forward of why you're producing the animals you're producing. You'll always have a market, because if you want a pure Ternate locality type, you're going to go to Rodney. If you want a very small snow reticulated python, you're going to go to Eric Lee, so on and so forth. Yeah, it's just hard to talk about, unfortunately. As you well know, you see the ramifications of when people end up with pets that they probably shouldn't have.
Yeah. I mean, that's like the dark side of the hobby that we don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
Is when we see these things happening, or, we see people on social media getting things that they're not prepared for. If I were to ever get, a Burmese python or a reticulated python, and I was obviously out of the state of Florida, that would take some serious planning.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, where I am now, even with the animals I have now, like I'm not looking at how many animals I can stuff into drawers in a rack. I have to look at how many cages I can fit on a wall down the road, whether it's 2 or 3 years down the road. It's what you have to look at. Honestly, you can't just say, oh, I can, no big deal, I can fit them into a rack. And then I'll worry about it. If I was buying animals right now to fill up the building that I want to have one day, then I would have so many more animals.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, what if the building doesn't happen? What if something happens, with my income? And
what
then,
if you get injured?
Yeah. What happens to all the animals then? It's so much to take into consideration. It gives me anxiety thinking about it sometimes. It definitely makes me anxious. And then, what do you do with all those animals? Like if you're chasing a morph, what do you do with all those hets? Like, are they feeders?
That is honestly probably the most ethical thing to do, because the market for a mainland pos head albino is so small. And the person who'd be interested in that is probably not going to be equipped to take care of it. Granted, that is not to say that it never happens. There are plenty of people who have really developed a passion from these kind of what we call, entry level animals, but you can't imagine that the vast majority that you would see at shows are ending up in good homes long term. I don't think anyone's ever done a life expectancy of a reticulated python in captivity, like a long study like that, to see where these animals that are sold for pets go. But I can't imagine that many live to see full-grown adulthood.
How long do reticulated pythons live to be?
They can live in zoos. Wild-caught ones have lived 20, 30 years.
Okay.
And it's probably longer than that. We don't necessarily know yet.
Yeah. Rich Crowley just lost a ball python that I can't remember how old it was. I want to say it was in its 30s, though.
Mm-hmm. They've lived up to 40 something years.
Maybe it was into its 40s. It was either in its 30s or 40s, which is just so crazy. Like that ball, I remember thinking that ball python was either as old or older than me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's bananas.
Yep. And so who's going to want that animal for 40 years, unfortunately?
Yeah. Everybody thinks about that when they're looking at parrots and tortoises, but zero people are thinking about that with ball pythons.
Oh my gosh. No. Yeah.
Zero people.
Zero. It's really a shame.
Yeah. I mean, being in Florida, going to reptile expos in Florida, it's a lot of ball pythons.
Mm-hmm.
And you look around and it's just tables upon tables upon tables of ball pythons. And if you think about those animals living to be 30 to 40 years old, man, that is wild.
Mm-hmm. And then imagine the ball python getting 25 feet, possibly.
Yeah.
So that's why I push so strongly for being selective with who you buy from, selecting who you sell to. There's an entire chapter, I think it's called the purchasing guide for a reticulated python. So people have kind of a set way to go about figuring out who to buy from and who to sell to, because it's challenging, obviously, with people lying about size potential, lying about lineage. But if you think you're getting an 8-foot snake and you end up with a 15-foot snake, that you're not going to be taking care of that animal the way it deserves.
Yeah, especially if you're giving it the option to go up and perch or have a water dish that it can get into. Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah. So
yeah,
it's hard to it's a very grim reality.
Yeah. Now there's no invasive retics in Florida, correct?
Oh, that's a great question. So there have been 14 confirmed sightings from FWC of reticulated pythons. The earliest.
I don't trust them.
These are confirmed sightings. So
they were black racers, bro.
So they are not established here in Florida, but there have been, a small number of sightings, nothing compared to the Burmese or the established population of reticulated pythons in Puerto Rico.
So those are definitely retics that have been let loose by keepers. The vast majority that they've been able to confirm that. The very first one I know they did work and were able to confirm that. And then some other ones they've also been able to confirm, but it's, very, very likely to be all pet keepers. Do you happen to know where they were found?
Yeah, actually you can Google it, but some of them were found down south and then some of them were found up as north as I was actually.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, there was one actually not too far from your area.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. There's a map from FWC.
No established populations.
No established populations. However, you do have to consider the potential of hybridization of a reticulated python and Burmese, because we know that they can do that in captivity. So theoretically, if a male reticulated python was to get out, it could hybridize with a female Burmese python. That's unlikely, and the Burmese pythons are probably more temperature adapted to the Everglades than a reticulated python would be, but it's still, a possible concern.
I just had Rachel Pickstein on.
Yeah, I got like the first 30, 45 minutes through that episode.
Yeah, and she said that the Burmese pythons are hybrids with Indian pythons.
I would need to look at that paper to see the work, but that's a very real possibility. There's also genetically distinct populations within Florida. It's not
really?
Yeah. So that's why you can find the granite morph in a certain location, and that
kidding.
Aren't. It's from a separate release event.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then obviously, what the craziest part is, after the big cold snap in 2010, that the genetics have changed. That the animals who are here now are better cold adapted than the animals who were here before 2010. That
was a cold year. I remember that year.
And, a lot of them died off, but the ones that survived had the genetics to be better adapted to the cold. Obviously, they survived, and now those are the ones reproducing. So theoretically, it could extend their population north.
This winter is probably the coldest. I think it's been the coldest winter since that year, since 2010. Like the amount of frost and everything we've gotten.
It was 25 here.
Really?
Yeah. We had snow flurry.
That's bananas.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that I wonder if it's just pushing them again this year, to more evolution. Hopefully
it results in a massive die-off.
Yeah.
But unlikely, unfortunately.
They're not going anywhere. They're part of the
not at all.
They're part of the environment now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's America's python right there.
Yeah. I need to get down there. Probably spring break. I'll go down there and try to get them.
Let's go. I want to go with you.
March, I think 17th that week.
Okay. We'll talk more.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I've got actually a lot to say on that after, but I can't talk about it on the air.
Right on.
Yes, sir.
I'm so conflicted on that too, because I see them getting taken out and then culled, and it's like, oh man, I love pythons so much.
Yeah. I was thinking about that, like the reality of, okay, you go down there and you find them, and then you need to dispatch them, and I don't have a captive bolt gun here.
Do you actually need to? Are you required to do that, or do you just report the animal? Do you just call up FWC and say, hey, I'm on the corner of this street and this street, and there's a berm? It
depends on where you're at. So if you're in Everglades proper, I don't believe you can dispatch them. But if you're outside of the Everglades, you are required to dispatch them. You can't transport them, because then that becomes criminal. So, you have to know where you are as well. And obviously the FWC has those regulations listed somewhere. So
it's too bad that there's no like Burmese rescue groups that want to like take them out of the state.
Yeah, there are some safe harbors where people can give them in Florida, but I think that was probably closer to when that ban went into effect. People aren't obviously collecting invasive berms and giving them to those pet stores, but in the market's just not there. I mean, you don't want a wild Burmese python full of pentastomes as a pet.
Yeah. Now even though Puerto Rico is part of us, you can't go and take the retics from Puerto Rico and bring them to America, correct?
That is a great question. I don't know what the legality of that would be.
I know that because I'm assuming, I wish I knew that.
Because you can't import them into the U.S. You can export them out of the U.S., but because Puerto Rico is a territory, I wonder if you could do that. That raises a very interesting question that I don't have an answer to. I don't know of anyone who's done it.
I'm sure that they have a lot of regulations on what you can and can't bring to Puerto Rico, and I'm sure it goes the other way too, where you can't just willy-nilly take pets and things from Puerto Rico to mainland America.
Yeah.
I'm sure that plays a part in it, just like Hawaii, Yeah,
and those biodiversity hotspots are very well protected. But
I'm
retics have gone and screwed that up.
So how did the retics end up on Puerto Rico? Just pets?
It was an intentional pet release.
What dicks?
There's a very long and involved story. It hasn't been published yet, and you can find it, but the people who are researching it on the ground haven't put it out there yet, so I can't share it, but it was an intentional pet release.
So like a big collection?
Something.
Okay.
What's interesting is they've done genetic work, and all of the animals are Sumatrans.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And so you can find amelanistic tiger, super tigers, and calicos out there. And we know calico is non-heritable, but they've been found in Sumatra. Amelanistic has been found in Malaysia. And then tiger, the original tiger was from Sumatra. So it's unclear if those mutations that the person had actually were wild caught ones found in Sumatra, or it just so happens that they were able to get pure Sumatrans, or that those morphs were not included in the study because it was only wild types. And there is, distinct populations, but we don't know yet. But the 70 something or so that they did sample were all from Sumatra, or all, I shouldn't say from Sumatra, but their genotype was Sumatran.
Yeah. How dug in are they? Are they as established as the Burmese pythons are here?
Yeah, they ain't coming out.
Wow. How long have they been there?
The first sighting was 2009.
That's not even that long.
Nope.
I mean, the Burms have been here since what?
Technically
80s?
The 70s. That was the first reported sighting, but probably the 80s is when they started to get established.
Wow. And that was in Florida. It was tied to Hurricane Andrew, right? Because there was, and also there's a lot of there was a lot of importers down there, right? And I've heard that the importers wanted to have established populations that they could just go out and pick animals. So they were intentionally putting them out so they could breed, so that way they'd have a piggy bank of animals to just go pick.
I can't confirm that for Burmese pythons, but I know
allegedly
for an alleged fact that did occur with boa constrictors, and is a very small invasive population of boa constrictors in Florida, literally because of that there was an importer who went out there. I believe they're on an island, who put them on an island and kept them there to reproduce and sell. So it would not surprise me if the exact same thing happened with Burmese pythons. But the origin story of Burmese pythons is so convoluted, and I talk about it in the book. I love invasives, as you can tell.
Yeah, it's super fascinating.
The speed at which I'm talking just drastically increased, I can tell. But basically what the current thinking is, there's a great paper published 2023, it's like 150 pages about the Burmese python situation. I believe it's Deguzi et al. 2023. And basically it is mainly attributed to pet keepers, either intentional or unintentional releases. There was likely a population that was released as a result of Hurricane Andrew, but they were already established or establishing by that time. We know that there were boa constrictors that were escapees from Hurricane Andrew, that played a role into it, but the majority of it is pet keepers. But obviously it's not solely pet keepers. There was also some unintentional releases.
Where are these boas?
I'd have to Google it.
Okay.
But we'll
talk later. We're going to have to go on an adventure there too.
I could probably pull it up right now here. Yeah, I love this stuff so much.
I wonder what kind of boa they are, if they're imperator or if they're...
I think they're constrictor.
Okay. So red tail, that's so interesting. I had no idea. I mean, I know that people have pulled escaped pets out. And when I say escaped, it's probably intentionally released pets out of the wild. And I know some people have, rehabbed them and kept them and everything. Mm-hmm. That's what's cool about the boas is if you find them, at least they're not, restricted in Florida. So you could yoink that and, keep it.
Yeah. I wonder what the legality is of that. If you can keep it, I know obviously there's no reason why you couldn't keep it legally, but I don't know if regardless, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. The worst part would be treating it for mites and parasites. So
25% of the Burmese pythons in Florida were found to have serpentovirus, so Nido. And then there was a great paper from Dr. Tillis about divergent serpentovirus and invasive Burmese pythons. 2022.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
that makes it really scary to go out and herp for berms then.
I would change your clothes.
Yeah, for sure.
So the boas are found in eastern Miami-Dade County, particularly around the Charles Deering estate. And then there's observations on iNaturalist where you can go and see where people have collected them. Wild. Yeah. But they seem to be fairly limited from my understanding. It's not going to be a big sprawl. FWC's website says there's one reproducing population of boa constrictors in Florida in eastern Miami-Dade County.
Okay.
So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's really crazy.
And as a result, I think that us as pet keepers need to do everything in our power to educate people on how to properly take care of them and educate the general public that these animals don't necessarily need to be these horrible man-eating beasts that they're made out to be.
Yeah, they only do that sometimes, and it's usually not like men. One person. It's very small women.
Oh, they eat men.
Oh,
it's like once a year that they eat someone in Indonesia, and then I think every 10 years or so that they eat a man.
That's so terrifying.
Yeah, it's horrible. Yeah. But they are being considered as a food source over there now. There was a great study done last year from Dr. Natouche that looked at the prospects of using reticulated pythons and Burmese pythons as a food source. You're farming them. Okay. Yeah. I was just going to say, are you farming them or are you hunting them? Because hunting them, I could see that really wiping out the population pretty quickly. Yeah. So, with the Burmese pythons here in Florida, their mercury level is too high to consume. So you can't eat them, but you can eat the gators. So what does that mean? Oh, well, they're probably predating on alligators, which are eating fish, which are full of mercury. Yeah, that's what I would presume. I don't remember the exact methodology of where they're getting all this mercury, or maybe they're just not able to dispose of it like an alligator is. I don't know. I'm sure.
Well, I've heard that usually like apex predators are the ones that have the highest mercury, right? Because you take it in and then you don't get rid of it. You just keep compounding that mercury level.
Yeah.
Huh. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And it's the exact same thing with the pentostomes, that the animals at these higher trophic levels are harboring.
I don't know any of those words. What's a pentostome?
Pentostome is like a worm.
Okay.
It's a particular, it's a species or a genera of worm that they will harbor in their lungs and stuff. But what's happening is that it's infecting the native animals. So a big Burmese python can harbor all of these pentostomes, but something like an eastern indigo can't.
So they have lungworms.
They just have worms in general, but I believe pentostomes tend to hang out in the lungs.
Oh man, I'm getting really skeeved out by these invasive worms.
So on one of the Retake Lounge podcasts, I had talked about wanting to keep like a pair of Biosecurity tree pythons outside after listening to the Ron St. Pierre episode that you did. But now knowing all of this and knowing that there have been there have been captive animals kept outside here in Florida that have gotten infectious diseases from wild animals, now I'm not considering it, which is a shame because it would be great.
Somebody just told me recently that like bird keepers in the UK have to bring all their birds in during the bird flu season.
Oh, do they?
Because the captive birds, like if you left them out on the patio, they can catch bird flu from like a wild bird coming up and sneezing on it.
I believe it.
Now I'm thinking about my diamond pythons I'm keeping outside. You're ruining everything.
I know. I'm sorry. That's kind of a fun sucker. Yeah.
No, I'm still keeping my diamonds outside. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. I mean, Ron St. Pierre has kind of the theory that they're supposed to have some of these things and that they can just live with them, and that when they're in the ideal environment, that it keeps everything in check. What do you think about that?
I would thoroughly disagree with that on the basis of being stewards of the animal, that if we are keeping them in captivity, we're keeping them on our terms, we need to provide them the best life possible. And part of that is not being at risk for infectious diseases.
But he's saying that like they're all like they have these things in them, but if you keep them right, it keeps them in check. Do you, I mean, kind of like with people, right? Like we all have salmonella in us.
Well, that's a commensal. That's different. And then you get a population overgrowth and then you salmonellosis or,
all right, slow down. What's commensal? All right. Remember who you're talking to here.
No, it lives on the surface naturally, but it can cause disease if it's out of balance.
Okay. So when you get too much.
Yeah. So typically, you can get sick and then they take over, or you get a perforation in your stomach, and then obviously you become septic because all of those bugs that were living in your stomach, happy and healthy, are now in places that they shouldn't be, even though they're technically native to your body.
Your body's mostly bugs.
Yeah. So with surgery, the biggest source of contamination is going to be the skin of the animal itself, and that's Staph pseudointermedius. So it's the animal's own skin that is harboring that bug, and then it gets out of whack.
Now, if you had a snake that had serpentovirus, would you cull it, or would you keep it separately? How would you try to remedy it? Did you hear my conversation with Dr. Julander on this?
I don't remember in particular, but I can speak with this somewhat intelligently. I would honestly probably move it outside just because it's already out there. But there are two main ideas for treatment. One that's being pursued at the school here, which is heat. This was discussed in Tillis, Ossoboff, and I believe Julander 2022, 2021, something like that. And they looked at different therapeutics. They examined antivirals. The issue is the antivirals that they found in culture to be effective are very expensive. But this heat protocol that they alluded to in the work is being continued, and basically you keep the animal right near their thermal maximum, and it kills the serpentovirus in the animal.
What is the thermal maximum?
I believe it's, for pythons, I believe it's hypothesized to be about 95.
That's pretty low.
Yeah, well, you'll also be keeping it with no escape from that temperature.
So it would be
like an incubator.
95 ambient box.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Whew.
Yeah. So that's why it's, you're kind of bringing the snake fairly close to death. Oh, it's like chemotherapy. That would be a really good parallel to draw, where you're killing a lot of stuff, but you're also going to be killing the cancer, theoretically. So I would not inherently euthanize an animal just because it had serpentovirus. However, 10 years ago, we didn't have that information, so I may have said something different. But the work's being done. We have great testing available. We have great biosecurity protocols that are being mentioned more and more. So hopefully it's not necessarily the death sentence that it used to be.
Yeah, it's really... it's interesting. I've been thinking about getting my animals swabbed and sending it out. Yeah, I haven't done it yet. I've been talking with Ish Quinonez about that a lot.
If you need help, let me know.
Yeah, I do, because that's something I want to get done. I mean, he's told me that you have to ship it, I think, overnight. So he does it in like huge batches, you know, he'll do like, so I could probably do my whole collection in one batch.
Yeah.
I'm kind of afraid though. Like I'm terrified that like, what if I found out that like 2 of them had it? I'd be so sad.
More information will never hurt you, because the more animals you add, the more you're going to want to kind of put off doing it. It's a lot easier to do it in your current state. What do you have, like 10 animals, right?
Like 20.
Much better to do it when you have 20 than 40. Much better to do it when you have 20 instead of 21. There's a couple different ways you can do testing at the commercial or at the consumer level. Excuse me. There's the 2 big ones are fish head, which you don't need to send out overnight, and then RAL, which is Research Associates Laboratory. You do have to send that one out overnight. And then if you go through a veterinarian, you can go through the University of Florida's College of Veterinary Medicine Zoological Medicine Diagnostic Lab. That's a mouthful. But that's the gold standard. However, you would have to go through a veterinarian to do that. It's also the most expensive, but they will sequence it for you if it is found to be a positive.
So they do... They're mainly checking for serpentovirus. Can IBD be checked for in boas?
You can check for IBD in all of your animals. I know specifically that here at the school we have like a boid and python quarantine panel, and it's serpentoviruses, Reptarina viruses, Ophidian paramyxovirus, and Cryptosporidium, either Varanus or Serpentis.
So how do I get that to you?
You'd have to send it to the school. So you would do probably a choanal mucosal swab. That's at the roof of their mouth. There's a photo in the book that someone took. My buddy Luke, great photo. You swab there, and then you can do either a vent swab for crypto, or you could do a fecal swab.
I don't think I want to do the crypto one so much.
Really? That's what terrifies me.
Oh, really?
Luckily, in the species that you and I are interested in, they're not all that common. But for the colubrids, it's very common.
I just don't want to have to swab their cloaca.
Yeah, that's why you can do a fecal swab. It's going to be a little bit less accurate, but it gets the job done. So there you go. Choanal slit.
Oh, wow. That will be hard with my Argentine boa.
Yeah, good luck.
I feel like it would really offend her too. You know, like I don't want to ruin our relationship. You know, we get along great.
And that's going to be something you have to decide for yourself. I'm going to be in the position to test everything, but that's also, as someone who's studying to be a veterinarian, I realize that the reality is a different end. If you have 20 animals, that could be $2,000.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that would just be for Serpento.
All right, we didn't talk about that. So that's how much it costs per test.
I think it's $90 to $95 for the single test through UF, and then for RAL, I think it's like 40, but you have to send it overnight, so it's more money. And then for fish head, it's like 50 or 60, but they provide the return shipping, so you don't have to pay for that. Fish head and RAL are very comparable in terms of price.
Okay.
If you're doing a mass, I would probably do RAL, but if you're doing a fewer number of animals, I would do fish head. And fish head's like, they walk you through the process where RAL doesn't.
Okay.
And they've done, they've sponsored research and they've done their own research. So there's, perhaps a little bit more incentive to do fish head. Okay.
I mean, that's $2,000 I could just spend on more enclosures to house all my snakes with serpentovirus.
There is an argument to be made that you could house a positive collection and just maintain very stringent biosecurity measures. I wouldn't necessarily do that, but there's obviously an argument. And the bigger thing, especially for yourself, would be to not send out animals that could be, positive. And obviously you're in that position.
That would be a total dick move.
Yeah. If it's your own collection, it's one thing, but if you're possibly infecting other people's collection, that's where I really harp on. That's when I would say test your animals.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Do boas deal with serpento better than pythons, or does it not make a difference?
I don't know if that has been specifically studied. Obviously we hear more about IBD in boas, but they can get it. And it seems like certain species have a higher predilection for getting it. So obviously green tree pythons are the poster child for it, but we know that other Morelia species, we know retics can get it. We know ball pythons can get it. So I would almost presume that pythons are more susceptible to it. But that's also because we have primed the tests to be more in line with the python serpentoviruses. I don't know if anyone has really done too much looking into boa serpentoviruses. So
why can't the chondros just deal with it? Are they just having a harder, are a lot of snakes coming in contact with it and it just isn't affecting them? Or, is it not that prevalent? Is it kind of like COVID was, where some people would get it and just be laid out and other people would get it and literally still be going to work and not even know that they had it?
All of the above.
Okay.
So serpentovirus is actually very similar to coronavirus. There's a lot of parallels. I think they're both non-enveloped, or maybe they are enveloped. I can't remember. RNA viruses.
What does that mean? What does the envelope mean?
That they have a barrier around them. And then the way that we use drugs interacts with, some of them are going to be breaking down that enveloped barrier. And then obviously if there's not an envelope, you can't break it down. So same thing with disinfectants. But that's, don't worry about that. And so there's also different species or variations of serpentovirus. So there is like a green tree python serpentovirus, and that's very commonly tested for, because there's only a certain number of things you can include for a PCR test. So they'll commonly test for that strain or that species, whatever it may be. And for green tree pythons, you have a particular set of, I don't want to say parameters, but there are some particular reasons why they're most susceptible. A big part was the Bushmaster farm. And you're just bringing over lots of imported animals. Some of them were wild caught. Some of them were bred at the farm. And you didn't see that. You don't see that with ball pythons. There's not this huge importation of wild caught animals and then being bred to the captive ones. And then there's the argument that we're not keeping them as perhaps well as we could. But that's a lot more debatable.
What do you mean by keeping them as well? Are we keeping them too cool, too hot?
Yeah. So this is hard to quantify, which makes it difficult to talk about. But if the animal has a higher level of baseline stress, they are more susceptible to disease. So if we consider nature to be the perfect environment for them, the further we deviate from nature, the more likely it is that they have a higher baseline level of stress. So we can do this for a retic. If you were to keep a retic in a small empty enclosure with a very, very bright overhead light that it couldn't escape from, that animal would be chronically stressed, far more likely to get infection. So if you're keeping animals in something that deviates more from their optimal environment, the more likely they are, hypothetically, to get or be susceptible to illness. It's a lot to think about.
Yeah. So when you say serpentovirus, there's multiple serpentoviruses.
Yes.
It's not just one kind.
Yeah.
Now, so there's a green tree serpentovirus. Can that go to a ball python or to a boa?
Theoretically, yes. And I believe it has.
Okay. And so if they get that, like, can 6 or 8 weeks go by and then they get over it like you would COVID, or do they forever have serpentovirus?
That's a good question. And I'm not sure if that's been defined yet. Obviously, some animals are going asymptomatic for years and years and years. We saw that with COVID as well. You could be asymptomatic and still have the disease. And then it wasn't until you get something else that you show clinical signs. It just makes it hard to kind of put out those blanket statements. And then theoretically, once they survive that infection, they should be. I don't think they're going to be spreading it, but I can't say that for certain. I'd have to look further at the research.
And how does it present itself?
Respiratory signs.
That's it.
I don't think there's that's the main sign that you think of. So if your snake is blowing bubbles, if your snake is wheezing, stuff like that, that's why you're going to think serpentovirus. But there's lots of other reasons why an animal can have respiratory signs. It
could be bacterial or fungal.
Bacteria, fungal, could be a different infectious agent. You don't know.
See, my ball python got an RI a while back, but they didn't like test for anything or take any samples or anything. I don't have the best vet for reptiles.
And that's an unfortunate reality as well.
Yeah, like it was not ideal either. It was right around we were about to get smashed by a hurricane, and I took her out and she was like, and like taking a gasp and mucus in her mouth. And I was like, you son of a bitch, like I know we're going to lose power. This is not going to be easy. So I rushed her not to my normal vet, to a different vet. And, they gave me antibiotics, and
without
it was without taking a culture. And so they were just like, yeah, she's got a bacterial RI. And they gave me like this cherry flavored antibiotic. And I had to shoot like copious amounts of it into her. And it was a horrible, like a full syringe of this sticky pink goop. And, she got better, obviously, within like 4 days, it went away. But I called the vet back and I was like, this can't be a thing that you guys are doing. This should not be a thing that you guys are doing because it sucks. I said, I'm giving her like the amount that you would give to a dog.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, it was the full syringe. And so like, it just made the whole thing so difficult to try to get her to take that much fluid on a daily basis. And then she's all sticky and she's got, substrate stuck to her and everything. And they're like, we really apologize. We just started, treating reptiles. And so we're doing it with cat and dog medication. And it's like, well, then you shouldn't be doing it yet, or you should have better options, Yeah. 1-star review. Yeah.
That's there's a great resource, the Associates of Reptile and Amphibian Veterinarians.com, ARAV. If you want to find a reptile vet.
That's where I found my reptile vet.
Are you serious? Really?
No, not them. My reptile vet that wasn't available.
Okay. The good one. Okay.
Yeah, the good one. And so I had another it was maybe 6 or 7 months prior, I had an RI pop up, and I took her there, and they put her in like this heated box that was like pumping oxygen in with her
Mm-hmm.
to help her with breathing and everything. And he looked her over, and yeah, it was a whole different experience. It was so much better.
And it is hard to find veterinarians like that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so I understand why keepers do their own essentially pseudo vet med, which I cringe at the thought of, but I get it.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it.
Yeah. Well, once you become a vet, if you could not leave the state and just actually move closer to me, that would be great. Let's work that out, okay?
Yeah.
Are you going? So when you become a vet, what is it going to be for? Are you going to be like a reptile vet? Is that going to be your squeeze?
Probably not, actually. It's almost 95% of the reasons why reptiles go to the vet is husbandry issues. And so that is kind of depressing to see day in and day out. I'm not talking serpentovirus to every client, unfortunately. I'm talking, are you keeping in a heated vivarium?
Yeah.
And so that's not necessarily something that's of interest to me every day. So probably dog and cat medicine, and then, see some exotics or horse reproduction. So that's called theriogenology. That's also of great interest to me.
Right on. Do you have any pet horses?
Absolutely not. And I would never have a pet horse. Those things, you just go dig a hole and throw all of your money in the hole, light it on fire, call it a day. That's the same thing as owning a horse. Absolutely not. No, I'm not going to spend $40,000 on a horse and then another $40,000 to treat laminitis. No.
I didn't know horses could be so expensive until I watched Yellowstone.
Yeah. They ship over $100,000 horses from Europe here on planes. It's insane.
It is. It's really crazy.
And I'll help you breed them. That sounds like fun. It is fun.
Yeah. So how come with feral cats, why do we take those suckers in and then neuter them and spay them and then release them back into the population? And we don't do that with Burmese pythons. How come we're not like capturing Burmese pythons and spaying and neutering them and then putting them back into the marsh?
That is a great question, and it's multifactorial. So number one, the detection rate for Burmese pythons, I think, is like 0.006%. So the detection rate is so low. They do track reproductive females just to see where they are going. But most feral cats are actually community cats. So people are taking care of them to some degree. Maybe they feed them once a week. Or if you're gullible, some cat shows up at your doorstep and you take them in.
Yeah.
Like mine. And so they're not like a true invasive. They are somewhat wanted. And people have more emotional attachments to cats than they would, a Burmese python. So that's why we spay and neuter them. It's arguable. Obviously, you are taking some animals out of the reproductive population. However, there is evidence that the more males that you neuter, that a more like essentially alpha male will take over. And now that there's reduced male combat, he'll breed even more females. Than if you were to have 3 males. Now you have 1 male who's not fighting with the other 2. So now he's getting his action and then the other 2 males' action.
And then you're just releasing them back out into the wild where they can push more birds to extinction and kill snakes and all that. Yeah,
it's not a good solution. It's kind of the most popular solution because you're still doing something, but people like cats and people dislike the idea of this mass euthanasia of cats, which I completely understand.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I totally get it. I mean, I dislike the idea of killing Burmese pythons too.
Yeah.
Even though it's necessary, it can be necessary, but not something you enjoy.
And it's a little bit different when you're talking about something like a cat versus a Burmese python, where they're just taking over in a way that is unimaginable compared to the cats who are just kind of killing the birds.
Yeah.
But ever since the Burmese pythons have been there, deer populations have gone down. All of the mammalian population of the Everglades has drastically decreased.
By how much?
I think up to 100% in some cases.
Jeez.
Yeah. There's a PBS video actually that came out like 2 years ago on YouTube that you can find that talks about it.
Oh yeah. I will check that.
It's only like 10 minutes. Great.
Okay. Yeah. I've been, I like I can't remember where I stream it, but Smithsonian has quite a few snake programs that are pretty good.
Oh yeah, those are great.
Yeah. I wish that there was more content like that out there.
There is, I mean, so Fishing Garrett on TikTok, his Puerto Rico videos have 7 million views about the retics
Mhm.
there. So there's this huge, um, I guess, demand from the general public to learn more about these animals. And so hopefully with things like the Smithsonian Channel or PBS, when they go out there and see that there are people who are willing to watch and pay for these type of things, that they continue to do so.
Yeah, I feel like if Animal Planet or Discovery went back to making shows like that,
Good
I think
luck.
it would, like stuff that's not sensational trash.
Yeah.
I feel like that it would be so good for their station. Like people, I think that there's a desire to learn
Mhm.
and gain knowledge in a non-sensational format. They're just not giving people the opportunity. I think it's kind of like how people thought that a podcast would never work. People think that, podcasts are, nobody's going to want to listen to something that's 3 or 4 hours long. Right.
Mhm.
And then Joe Rogan's got the biggest podcast in the world and he's getting money thrown at him.
Yeah, $700 million.
Yeah. Just preposterous amounts of money. And so there's, I don't think that the people that are producing media are really, in touch with what people actually want and want to see, and I used to love that Wild Kingdom and all those shows. I used to love sitting down and watching those. And now it's really hard to find programs like that.
Yeah, me too. You go to YouTube now, and
Yeah.
the quality is a lot less. Far decreased.
Yeah. I really like what Dave Kaufman is doing, going out and looking at the animals in the wild and everything and going on the adventures. But that has to be such a huge time and money suck for him to do that on his own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But he's doing it.
Yeah. He's definitely doing it. The, so where do you go from now? What's your next book that you're working on?
Unless someone wanted to co-author a book, I don't foresee any books happening in the very near future. I can say that I am in the very initial parts of working on a paper. So I'm very excited about that. That'll be a peer-reviewed, multi-institutionary collaboration. So I'm really looking forward to that.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited for that.
Yeah, I can tell you more details off the air because you'll like the topic.
Sure. So what are some, if let's say you were going to write 2 more books in, let's say, your lifetime, right?
Mm-hmm.
What other snakes would they be on? If you, let's say 2 more books, so two other species.
I would love to do the captive history of green tree pythons. The natural history has already been touched on really well by Dr. Drew Lander and Terry Phillips. But the captive history is so rich for that species complex. And there's so many fun stories, like Carl Switek bringing in bags of snakes in the 70s. Just so many fun, weird things and all the weird names that pop up, like Mandango and some of the more risque names. That would be fun. And then I'd love to do another species look. Do you have recommendations?
No, I mean, I was hoping, write me a Timor python book.
I need someone who I need someone who's bred them.
Yeah. Yeah. Like a Ryan Young or something. So
if they want to write it, I'd be more than happy to help.
Yeah. I mean, that does sound like a cool book. The, going with the green trees, but the captive history, especially since, like you said, I mean, that's going back to what, the 70s.
Yeah, the first clutch was 73, and I spent quite a bit of time. I don't know how much you were able to read of the captive history for the complete retic, but I think I've got a photo of the very first clutch in captivity of reticulated pythons in there. So I was pleased with myself.
That's crazy.
That was hard to find, hard to try to verify. Obviously, I can't be certain, but the captive history is such an important element to their story, and it just wasn't out there. And so much of this I had to go digging. I was calling people like Cameron, to go straight to the source. It was very hard to do, and I'm glad I was able to put it into a singular source.
Yeah. Do you think that what was the experience of writing the book off-putting, or
Yes.
did it? Oh, really?
I'll just say full stop. Yes.
I was gonna say, I was curious if it had the opposite effect, where you thought, boy, this was so rewarding that I want to write another book on snakes.
No, absolutely not. It reinforced a lot of the ideas that I had going into it. I have always approached the book and approached a lot of things like a 2-year-old, just asking why. And this is the complete product of, I ran out of things to ask why about. So, but to hear firsthand kind of the nefarious things swimming under the surface, it was hard. And I was writing this at the same time the Samson stuff was going on. So to have that, really be in just kind of casting a shadow over the work. And but people were very pleased to talk, very pleased to help. So there was, small bits of humanity that I was able to find. And like I said, this book stands on the shoulders of giants, and without those people helping, it would be impossible.
Did it turn you off of keeping retics in captivity?
By and large, yes. However, there is still a fairly large portion of myself that enjoys the practice, enjoys seeing people do it well, and is in constant wonderment of the end result that people are able to achieve. Seeing something like the TK line super dwarfs, how beautiful those are. And that's a wild type. Seeing these incredible mutations like Ollie's photo on the front cover of the Aztec Sunfire. That's just an absolutely beautiful animal. So it's hard to find those little moments of positivity, and especially in an otherwise so negative subset of herpetoculture. But I wanted to try to make a positive impact.
So the ethics of keeping reticulated pythons, do you think that there should be some sort of a national system put in place? I mean, I know that this comes up as a topic of conversation, but should we figure this out and get it put in place before we lose the ability to keep them? I mean, I've said that before, that I wish that Florida had some sort of a system like Australia. I don't know if that's unpopular or not for me to say that, and I don't really care. But I think that really any way that I could still have a retic or a berm, I would take that over not being able to have it. So if that's some database where your animal gets chipped and you are tied to that animal now until it has been transferred through a database with the state or the federal government or whatever it is. Honestly, I guess it would be great if we could do it on a state level. But at the same time, there would have to be a way for it to be able to leave the state and go to another state where it could be a problematic situation, right? Where you could transfer that. But I would take that any day over just not being able to ever have these animals ever.
Absolutely. That part of it falls on herpetoculture is because we've been so averse to letting in any level of legislation that it becomes either a free-for-all or absolutely just an outright ban. And who does that help? Why there's essentially no reason that a responsible keeper like yourself shouldn't be able to keep a Burmese python or a reticulated python, even in the state of Florida. Yes, they are invasive. Yes, Burmese pythons are established, but your animals are not going to get out. And if you were to pay, even $500 to the FWC, that they come in, they do a cage inspection, make sure you have a lock on your cages and a lock to the door to your snake room. That animal's microchipped. It's tied to your name. I would welcome that compared to not being able to own them. And yes, exactly, that can be considered a governmental overreach, but isn't a ban an overreach by that logic? So let's work with these people. Let's show that there are people doing it responsibly. I have this idea of being too good to legislate, where we do all of these things on our own, but there's very little appetite for that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like with gun rights, you know, like you get a lot where they're like, there should be no rules at all. And it's like, really?
Well,
really? You think that? Cause I have a friend that took his life after he was Baker acted.
Oh, okay.
So he was able to go back out and get another one. Okay, now I own firearms. Okay, and I've been a member of the NRA and all that. But you can't sit here and tell me that there should be no regulations or that there should be nothing in place. He shouldn't have been able to get another one.
Absolutely.
Okay, so so paying the FWC $500 to have them come and inspect my house to make sure that everything is locked, I wouldn't view that as government overreach in any way, shape, or form, because the animal's already established in the state and destroying the environment.
And that $500 is going to go towards conservation of that.
It's a necessity, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You know, the same way up in, you know, they do emissions testing on vehicles and things like that. Like, there gets to be a point where it's something that is needed. You know, it's something that, hey, you know what, maybe we need to vote on something and agree on something here that this is actually something that we need before we just run right off the edge of the cliff.
And the infrastructure is already there that we could be doing this, and no one's pushing for it. We have Clutch, which is used by quite a few ball python people. And Justin Kapolka says in his videos, he's able to track his entire lineage of animals through that program. There's no reason why we couldn't apply that to our animals, but put in a microchip. So that animal, we can see who owns it, where it's transferred. I get this is an unpopular opinion, but living in the state of Florida and still wanting to keep reticulated pythons and wanting to be taken seriously about it.
Yeah. I think that's the big thing that's the big like line that's drawn in the sand, is that when you're actually in the state where you can't keep any of the animals, then in your mind you're thinking, well, if they would have put some rules and regulations in place before it was a problem, and if they would have said, like, if they would have, and obviously you know, hindsight is always 2020, so you can look back and say, well, they should have done this, that, and the other thing. But I wish that right now we could reevaluate and make it so that way. And I think it would help with public relations with snakes as well. Mm-hmm. Right. If somebody said, hey, you know, instead of saying kill them all, they can say, well, okay, I know that there's a ton of regulations in place, and that person that has that is a responsible person, mm-hmm. you know, and that they're not going to just take it outside and dump it, you know? So then it's a sense of security for the other people that we're living, our neighbors, you know, mm-hmm. It's a sense of security for them.
A very easy parallel to draw is big game hunting in Africa. I would never do that myself, but they convinced stupid Americans to pay an obscene amount of money to go basically kill problem animals. And that money is going directly back towards conservation efforts in the national parks. So if you want to have a dentist who pays $50,000 to kill Cecil the lion, I think it's abhorrent on a personal level, but I get it.
Yeah. And it's fine. We can hate him.
I feel very strongly about that, but I understand why those mechanisms are in place. I'll hate the sin and the sinner in this case.
Yeah. Yeah. I just don't like the hard line. No, there can't be anything, no regulations, you know, all that. It's like, well, then we're not going to have anything.
Yeah.
If you can't meet people halfway, we're not going to have anything.
And no one is preaching that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've brought it up a couple times, and surprisingly, I haven't had anybody like reach out to me and say I'm an idiot.
Has anyone ever posted like a comment like, oh, I don't know who the expert and the idiot was in this episode?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. I'm waiting for that.
Yeah. But I deleted that comment. I was like, No, I think I can't remember. It was a really dick move. Like the person just was a total ass and really rude. So I think I just removed it. You know, but I hope that I wish we could have figured that out, but I know that ship has sailed, and you know the laws are in place, and once those laws are in place, there's no reversing it or going back. And I feel like if we as a hobby could govern ourselves, and like, could you imagine that? Like if the hobbyists actually said, "Hey, here's the legislation that we want put into place, and here's why. We want a system, a database similar to Australia. You know, we want a website where you transfer the animals." You know, if we put that forward, I think it would be such a good look for the hobby.
That's exactly my too good to legislate idea, where it's all internal, that we show ourselves to be so serious and so forward thinking that no external forces have to act upon us because it's all internal. And there is no reason why the hobby shouldn't welcome that.
Yeah.
Because it's just raising the bar for everyone.
And then on the flip side, I think that like the venomous, it's really difficult in Florida, you know?
Oh yeah, it's impossible.
Yeah. So I would love to have a blue Insularis, but I would need to get 1,000 hours logged working with vipers. And I can't even find anybody in my area that works with vipers.
And who's going to open their collection?
Yeah, to just have some rando come in and scoop poop. Like it's not going to, I mean, that would literally be like some neighborhood kid coming up to me and saying, "Hey, I'll take care of your snakes if you sign this little postcard that says I'm logging hours with you." I'd be like, "No, get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
Go wash your hands." You know, like that. Yeah. There would be no way.
Yeah. I understand why that system is in place, but the manifestation of that is so hard to do. So no one does it.
Yeah. Yep. And just in my neighborhood, we had an Asian water monitor crossing the street a little ways back. You know, and so there it is again, where it's like, okay, so we make these things too easy to get. There's no databases, there's nothing, and then everybody that wants to keep Asian water monitors is going to lose it.
Yeah, the people who are doing it right are the ones who suffer.
Yep. Anyway.
Depressing.
Yeah. Sorry to make everything so depressing.
No, that's trying to, especially with reticulated, no one talks about this with ball pythons, but
they should though, because that's a depressing market too.
Yeah, they talk about how much the price sucks, but they don't talk about how to basically build a better herpetoculture. And so with reticulated pythons, it's obviously at the forefront. And I'm glad that there is a generation of people who are really outspoken on this and are trying to do things very seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have to do that, you know, all together. I have the US ARC shirt. I wish I was wearing it right now. It says United. Oh. Well, it says United We Stand on it. And I like that should be what everybody thinks about the hobby itself, is that we need to embrace each other and find better ways to keep and not, you know, dump all over each other at every chance we get. You know, we have to kind of come together and figure out the best ways to keep and advance the hobby that way, or it's not going to last.
And part of the goal with the book was to raise the bar so the bad apples kind of fall out of favor. That if you're asking about serpentovirus and the person just goes on this diatribe about how it's not real, they might lose business, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like by doing that and putting the bar up high, you're kind of taking the veneer off and showing the reality and showing what's underneath and just letting people know that, like, hey, this is a huge responsibility.
Yep. It's a huge responsibility, but the rewards are so great. So do it correctly.
Exactly. Well, on that note,
I was going to say that was a great way to.
yeah, I think so. We'll wrap it up from there. You are now on social media.
Boo! Yes, boo hiss.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I was looking for you for the longest time, and I was like, how do I get in contact with this guy to get him? And then finally, I was like, wait a minute, he's got an Instagram.
I was on social media for a while, and then the book came out, and it's so hard to talk with people, and then you get criticism, and to already have kind of a baseline high stress life, and then when you go home, this thing that's supposed to be your escape is only adding to that stress. Like, I would have a physical reaction every time I heard the Facebook Messenger ping, even if it's someone even if it's Rodney messaging me. And so for my own sanity, I just kind of stopped. And I wish I hadn't. I wish I had just stepped away. But it was easier to just put up a wall. And so, now I'm back in a limited capacity. It's not, I hardly post, but it's great to maintain connections like the one you and I have and others, but it's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you're on there. People can look you up on Instagram. It's, what's your Instagram handle?
Yeah. Glen Herpetofauna.
Okay.
I was originally Poisonous Pythons, and no one got it.
Yeah, everybody was like, just so you know, it's venom.
I think I'm being funny, but
yeah, no, it's people are too literal. I will say though, I put up a TikTok with my spotted python, and it got like 2 million views.
Dang.
And the amount of people that said she's sizing you up, it was very without context or inflection or anything. Like, I couldn't tell if they were being serious or not.
They were.
Yeah. But I know that some people were just being silly, and they were like, oh, cause I've said that in comments.
Oh yeah.
So, like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, are they being serious, or are they jesting with me? And social media can be hard. Comments are hard.
Yeah.
It's hard.
I like to live in my own little bubble anyway. So.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about this real quick. I have a copy of the book here to give away. And so the way we're going to do that, I'm going to be doing a social media post when this episode comes out. And that was very nice of you to send the book over for that. That'll be awesome to send that out to somebody. I'm super excited about it. So just look for that post from me. It's going to be of the book. And in order to enter to win that, you have to tag 3 people in the comments. You have to follow Glenn, and you have a pinned post of the book. So you got to go there and like that and comment Snake Boy sent me. That's going to be the primary thing. Cause like if that comment isn't there, that's where I'm going to be pulling all the names from. So that's how you have to, how you have to enter it. If it's like 3 people, I'm going to be really depressed.
And then I guess you
I know
have
it's
to
a
put it at the
big
beginning
ask.
of the episode. Maybe clip it and post it like on its own to your social media, and then put this at the beginning of the episode.
Yeah. Or I might make a reel too.
Yeah, that would be a good way to do it.
Yeah, I'll figure something out. We got some time. But thank you, Glenn. I really appreciate you coming on. You're a very thoughtful, kind individual, and I love the amount of thought that you put into everything you do. And I'm glad that you're back on Instagram, and just turn off the notifications.
Thank you. And obviously I'm a very big fan of the podcast. So thank you for having me on.
That means a lot to me, man.
There are so many subpar reptile podcasts. To have something be a shining light, you have no idea how nice it is to, oh wow, I actually want to, watch this, instead of someone ramble about how lizard men are running the government, and then the guest is just sitting there. That's
a show.
No,
I want to listen to that.
That's obviously like up to like the 9th degree, but you just, so many of these shows are subpar, or they're not asking thoughtful questions. They're not engaging like they should. And you'll see like they'll get good guests and you're just wasting their times. And I don't want to waste 2 hours of my own time listening to something that's not informative.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Stop listening to the Lizard Man one, though.